Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am walking on a brisk, cold morning. And this is something that a lot of you comment that you really like, is to watch me out walking around. I don't know why that is, but that's okay. If this is a good way for you to do a Bible study or devotion or to learn more about the faith, by me walking around outside, I'm glad to do it. Besides, I need to get out and walk a little bit. I sit quite a lot through meetings and visits and that kind of thing, so it's good to stretch my legs. So in 2024, we're going to be covering two portions of the Bible pretty thoroughly. One is the Gospel of John, and I'm going to be covering nearly every chapter, nearly every story in the Gospel of John. And the reason I say nearly is I'm going to actually leave out chapters 13 through 17. And the reason why, that's the upper room discourse where Jesus is talking to his followers just before his arrest. And the reason I'm not going to really preach much on that is that my recent sermon series on the Holy Spirit, almost all of it came from those chapters. So we really have covered that this year. So I'm going to cover the rest of John, everything that I can cover in John pretty thoroughly and exhaustively. Then in the fall, we are going to be looking at the letters of Paul, and I'm going to preach a sermon on every letter of Paul. Now that means, though, it's not going to be thorough, right? So how can you take the book of Romans and turn it into one sermon? You really can't, but I'm going to attempt to anyway, at least give the main ideas found within the book of Romans. Then we'll be looking at all of Paul's writings to some extent. So what I want to do this morning is I want to start us down the road of looking at Galatians pretty thoroughly. And there's a really good reason for that. One is that all of Paul's major ideas are found in the book of Galatians. Secondly, the book of Galatians is just actually a fairly easy writing from Paul. It's just fairly easy to understand in comparison to, say, 1 Corinthians or Romans, where a lot of people get lost and confused. Even Ephesians, short little book that it is, a lot of folks find Ephesians fairly confusing, but for the most part, Galatians is a pretty easy book to understand. And if you understand the book of Galatians, it becomes a key that unlocks the other writings of Paul. It makes the other writings easy to understand. But that said, Galatians itself requires some unpacking. So I want to begin this morning by just going over some of the ideas. And today we're only going to cover one idea, and next week we'll cover another. It'll take 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks to do an introduction to Galatians, and then we'll just start walking through the book of Galatians. So the idea that I want to present this morning is that Israel, her faith, the Jewish people, their faith contained a universal hope, not just for themselves, but for the entire creation, for all the world. And in fact, you can find that all the way back at the beginning in the book of Genesis. God promises to multiply and bless Abraham's family. But he's not just going to bless them for their own sake. He promises to use them as a vehicle through which God will bless the rest of the world. So Israel's not just being blessed for her own sake. She's being blessed in order to be a blessing. Now, this idea is something that Jewish people found very practical. And if you read the Torah, and I'm not going to give all the passages, but if you read Exodus, if you read Numbers, if you read Deuteronomy, you're going to find in all of those books a deep concern for the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant. So Jewish people were to practice hospitality, to welcome the stranger in their midst, to watch out for the immigrant, not watch out like, ooh, bad immigrant, but to watch, to make sure that their rights were protected when they were in the land of Israel, that people didn't take advantage of them, that people dealt ethically with them and fairly with them. If they got in trouble, that the same laws applied to the immigrant as did the national Israelite. Jews were to they were to care for those in need. When they were living abroad, Jeremiah instructs them to work for the common good of their adopted homeland and to pray for the cities in which they live. In the first century, if you had visited a synagogue, you would have been welcomed. You would have been welcomed with open arms. There were lots of people that visited synagogues throughout the Roman world in the first century. You would have seen people that were curious, just wanted to know more about Judaism. You would have found people who were called God-fearers, and God-fearers were Gentiles who believed in the God of Israel, but were not ready to convert to Judaism. You would have found converts, of course. You would have also found people called righteous friends. Righteous friends were people who were friends to the Jewish people, but who would never probably even have an interest in converting, but were friends to the Jewish people. And this would have been quite normal in a synagogue during the first century. And that's really important because it reflects what we find in the Bible, this universal hope. Now, the Old Testament has this idea that someday all of the nations will come to the Lord. But it's not clear how that will happen or even what that will look like. And so, for example, let me grab my notes here because I do need my notes to give you some examples because they are just so different from each other. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So Isaiah chapter 2. Sorry, can't do all of this from memory. Isaiah chapter 2 paints a picture of the age to come. And in the age to come, the Gentiles come willingly, even eagerly, to Mount Zion to learn the Torah and to learn to walk in the ways of the Lord. Now, Psalm 2 is completely different. Psalm 2 implies that the Gentiles are so wild and so stubborn that God will actually have to break their will. Isaiah chapter 14 seems to indicate that Gentiles will participate in the age to come, but that we will be second-class citizens, serving as household servants. Not a flattering picture. Zechariah 12 says that God will pretty much have to destroy the nations because they'll never submit to God. But then you have passages like Isaiah 19 and Zechariah 2 that say that someday the Gentiles will be siblings to the Jewish people, and that we will stand beside Israel and serve the Lord together in unity. But how in the world would that happen? How in the world would that happen? The Jews in the first century had no idea how that would happen. They themselves were struggling to try to live out the faith the best that they could, and found that they were not always good at it. And because they were not always good at it, most of their focus was on their own faithfulness to God. And so largely the Judaism of the first century was not a missionary religion because they just didn't have the time and energy to figure out how to win the nations to God. But they knew that within their scriptures was this idea that someday Jew and Gentile would stand together as siblings and serve Yahweh. But how would that happen? Well, astonishingly, the Apostle Paul and other early Christians believed that all of that was coming to fulfillment in Jesus. That, to use language from Colossians and Ephesians, in Jesus, God had reconciled all things in heaven and on earth. He made it possible for people as different as Jews and Gentiles to come together in unity and worship the Lord. This universal hope was being fulfilled in Jesus. In Jesus, the early Christians would say a new humanity was being made. Neither Gentile nor Jew, yet somehow both. Well, I hope that's helpful to you. That's one of the first big ideas from Galatians. Next week we will explore another, and again it'll take a few weeks for us to get through each of the introductory ideas, and then we'll just start plowing through the book of Galatians together. And I hope it'll unlock the rest of Paul's writings, because Paul is just absolutely essential to understanding Christianity. The first missionary to the Gentiles, the first Christian theologian, the first Christian theologian to really start synthesizing all the various ideas found within Christianity. So we will take a deep dive into Galatians. Thank you.